Hello everybody and welcome back to World of Warships Legends. My name is Spartan Elite 43 and tonight we are back in the Minnesota. Been a while folks, but it's time to answer the questions that we posed. Is Minnesota truly worth as an upgrade from the Kansas? But before we get into it, if you guys enjoy these videos, go ahead and punch that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, join the Spartan Army/Navy, and be a part of our path to 60,000 subscribers. Thank you guys so much for all of your support. You guys have been absolutely crushing it as always. Thank you guys. But back to the task at hand. We're trying to prove whether the Minnesota is truly worth it as an upgrade from the Kansas. Now, I catch a lot of flack because I speak my mind, because I play both of them and I enjoy both of them. I know a lot of people think I hate the Minnesota. I don't hate the Minnesota. I just don't think it's worth it, in my opinion, when you consider how expensive Tier 8 truly is. Not just the initial cost of Tier 8, but then the service cost of Tier 8. The fact that you have to go up against Legendary Tier, which isn't that big a deal, let's be honest. I mean, I went up against Legendary Tier in the Kansas back in the day too. It's not that much different. I mean, a Yama is still a Yama, right? It doesn't care. Everybody's got 32 mil. Anyway, the biggest difference between the Kansas and the Minnesota is Kansas has better concealment. Minnesota has better hit points. You have about 10,000 more hit points on the Minnesota than in the Kansas. Every single thing else is pretty much null. It's equal for the most part, right? If anything, I would say that Minnesota does have a little bit more exposed armor with it being all flat, which the Kansas has as well. But Kansas kind of, it has that lowering at the back like the Minnesota does, but it also has that in the front. So the ship sits a little bit lower in the water, meaning you don't take as many big pins, unless, of course, it's longer range where you get that plunging fire through the deck. But Minnesota, it's kind of a big target, right? Now, with all of that being said, the difference between Minnesota and Kansas is negligible, which is why I say that it's not really worth it as an upgrade from Kansas. They're almost identical. The only difference, like I said, is Kansas has better concealment because it's smaller, sits lower in the water. Minnesota has better hit points. So Kansas has about 69,000. Minnesota has 79,000. Is 10,000 hit points worth, and about a kilometer less concealment, by the way, is that worth 30 plus million silver to buy this ship? And then the higher service cost that comes with Tier 8. Personally, I don't think it is. Does that mean that this is a bad ship? Absolutely not. It's a fantastic ship. Kansas is fantastic. Minnesota is fantastic. I just think for better bang for your buck, I don't think it gets better than Kansas when it comes to these standard, I guess you call them standard dreadnought types. Like, they're super dreadnoughts, clearly, but they're like standard type. It's a whole thing. Old school designs, World War I designs, I believe, for the Kansas and the Minnesota, never realized because they were determined to be obsolete by the time that they were actually designed. There were better designs out there, aka the Montana class and the Iowa class. Montana class was never realized either, but the Iowas were, and we built 4 out of the 6 of the Iowas. And it was the pinnacle of battleship engineering at the time. I know that the Vanguard folks out there are be tooting their horns, but Vanguard was built after the war, didn't do anything, and went out of service after like 12 to 15 years. The Iowas entered service during the war, didn't really do any surface engagements too much, but they were AA platforms that helped shield carriers during the war. They did a lot of shore bombardment between World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and in the Gulf. They were kept in service, refitted multiple times throughout the years, and were in service for like 40 years. Pretty crazy. So, I am in the camp that the Iowas are the best battleships ever built. And I always say that they're the most modern battleships ever built because they were refitted multiple times. They had their missile launchers, they had Sea Whiz, they had all sorts of upgrades during the 80s that just made them a more modern battleship than the Vanguard was when the Vanguard went out of service in like the late 50s, I believe. Maybe it was early 60s. But Vanguard, I don't believe, got any modernizations. I think she was just built in her configuration, and then she served her purpose 12 to 15 years, I think, and then she went out and she was scrapped. But that's neither here nor there. What we're talking about is the Minnesota and the Kansas. And I think we can all agree that both of them are... Speaking of, hello, Kansas. How are you doing? Now, I'm not going to lie that our game has started off pretty slow. There's not been a lot of damage here. This is one of the downsides of these big, slow super dreadnoughts. They are very good at delivering punishment to just about anybody at any time. They have really decent range, though not usually as much range as, say, an Iowa-class battleship, because the Iowas had 50 caliber guns. These guys have 45 caliber guns, I believe. Even though I think there was a typo in the thing a while back that said that it had Mark 7 guns, which is the Iowa guns, which is not true. These two ships have 45 caliber guns. You can very easily tell that by A, the slow shell trajectories, or slow shell velocities, and the amount of citadels these things crank out. Just like the Alabama, just like the Massachusetts, this thing will citadel the out of everything given an opportunity. Obviously, Lepanto's pretty tough. It's not going to give up citadels at this range very often. However, the Sovietsky Verzaya, Tier 8 Russian premium battleship that was just released recently. Now, I learned my lesson pretty quickly that the Verzaya has a very interesting little piece of armor. It specifically protects the Verzaya in a drive-by scenario by placing a thick piece of armor only over the front turret at the waterline. It protects the citadel right there. How do you get around this? You don't shoot at the front turret like you would on most battleships. Now here we fire the front guns. Look at where the shells hit. Perfect. Right at the second turret and in the center of the ship. And we fire the rear turrets of Justice and Truth. And goodbye, sunshine. That is what this thing is capable of. Is that any better than the Kansas was capable of? No. It's basically identical. But this thing, with its higher hit point pool, does tend to be allowed to be a little bit more aggressive than the Kansas. And I love being aggressive in the Kansas, so this is a match made in heaven, right? Like, I love this ship. I just don't think it's worth it. And that's where people get upset with me. They're like, oh, I love the Minnesota. It's better than the Kansas in every way. It's like, it's really not. Let's be objective here. It's really not. It's a carbon copy of the Kansas that's slightly worse concealment by a kilometer. It has 10,000 more hit points, and that's basically it. Everything else is basically Kansas. It's got the same flat armor, though there's a little bit more of it sticking up above the waterline on the front of the ship than the Kansas has. But look at this. I mean, come on. Can you really ask for more than that? That was 2 guns, 21,000 damage. Right? That's why I fell in love with the Minnesota and the Kansas, right? That's why I love the Montana. That's why I love the Maine. Like, the Iowas, they hit hard too, but they just don't have that volume that you send down range with 12 American armor-piercing rounds, right? The Iowa's fully capable of just punishing you, but the extra 4 guns is what does it. Or, yeah, 3 guns. Sorry. 3 guns. Go from 9 to 12. It's plus 3, dum-dum. Anyway... Math. It's difficult. Shut up. Anyway, we're at 120,000 damage just like that. We were having a pretty ho-hum game, right? Like, that's why these ships are so gosh blood. That's why I love them. Like, it goes from being relatively meh game to absolutely destroying anything that moves very quickly. Now, I could fire my guns at this Ochakov right here, but I just damage con. So we're going to use a little bit of our brain. We're gonna Brigbane it, right? We're gonna Brigbane the crap out of this. Why would I fire at a cruiser that's 16 kilometers away and running? It's gonna be very difficult to hit, especially if he decides he can dodge, which, unless you have like 1 brain cell and it's dedicated to only looking down the barrel of your gun, you can dodge in a cruiser versus a battleship, especially a slow shell velocity battleship like the Minnesota, Kansas. It's very easy to dodge these, right? Which is why you're going to see me do a couple of things in a moment when we shoot at that by. But right now, we're just focused on, once again, another German battleship who's hell-bent on sailing broadside, and his guns aren't even pointing in my direction. Down he goes. Was there ever any doubt, folks? That was 9 rounds out of the 12 hitting, and it probably hit more than that. It just only needed 9 to kill. Actually, it only needed 8 to kill. But by the time we get spotted and the Ojakov is capable of firing at us again, we've almost got our damage control back, right? Now watch what I'm going to do in this fight with the Ojakov. I want you to pay attention, okay? I'm not going to fire full salvos every single time. Notice that I start ripple firing. Now, the ripple fire on this salvo, we'll call that a full salvo because it was really not much of a ripple fire. It was very much more of a full salvo. There was almost no delay in between each turret firing, so you don't get as much out of it. Now, there are situations where ripple firing is superior to salvo firing. Okay, I use salvo firing probably 80% of the time. Or at least I try to when the game allows me to salvo fire and doesn't make me ripple anyway. But ripple firing, where you fire each turret individually, can be very useful in forcing cruisers who are kiting away to make their move so that they get out of their way of the first shot, and that makes them more susceptible to the next incoming shells, right? Because you can then see what he's doing with the first shot and then adjust your aim accordingly, meaning you're allowed to hit more shells. Now, obviously we missed here, but that's okay. Again, we're shooting at a very agile cruiser at a long distance with slow shells, all right? This guy shouldn't be taking hits unless he's just flat out not paying attention. But that's where it comes down to us to recognize the patterns of each player. Believe it or not, even the best players, sometimes it's easier to predict the best players than it is to predict just bad players. Now here you can see I fire my guns because I'm trying to bait this guy into shooting me, right? But I only fire the one turret. So we fire it, we get spotted, and lo and behold, he can't resist. He's at 19 kilometers, he thinks he's untouchable, and we immediately send the rest of the guns downrange. Expecting him to turn out, we aim high, but he slows down too. So now we've seen him change what he's doing, which means he's clearly knowing what he's doing. He knows he's going to lose this match. There's no chance that he wins this, right? But the fact that he's not just falling into the trap of doing the same maneuver over and over again makes him harder to predict from the battleship, aka me. I'm pretty good at baiting people into doing what I want them to do. And most people fall into the habit, and if you're a cruiser player especially, you need to stop doing this. Stop falling into the habit of doing the exact same thing every time you try to dodge. Because as you get more and more predictable, the shells start to get a lot closer, right? As we're about to land a few shells on target this time. 2 shells on target, about 8,000 damage, okay? He's very lucky that the 2 shells that landed were a little bit lagging, okay? And when I say lagging, it means that we didn't lead him enough. It's not the servers that are lagging, though let's be honest, servers sometimes can do that. But when I say lagging in this sense, I mean that I did not lead him enough, so the shells are lagging behind the target, right? So what are we going to do? Anticipating him to finish this turn, we lead him. He actually does not finish the turn, wisely deciding to go straight ahead, which allows him to escape once again with only 2 penetrations. One was an overpin, so probably about 11 to 1,200 damage there. The other one was a full pin, so anywhere from 3,000 to 4,000 damage most likely. So between the two, we can assume that we hit him for about 6,000 to 7,000 damage again. I didn't pay attention to the actual number, so I'm sure somebody will yell at me in the comments. But we're at 158,000 damage. We've got a high count. We've got this guy on the ropes. He's running away, and you can see I'm trying to bait him in again. But at this point, this guy knows what I'm doing, and he ain't taking the bait. Remember, there are times to run and not fire your guns. There, like we showed earlier, we've been able to mitigate most of the damage from this guy simply by managing our damage controls, dictating the engagements to the best of our ability. Despite the fact that the guy is running away, we can dictate some of the engagements. Now here, we catch this guy in a turn towards our battleship, and we expected him to maintain that course, but he actually wisely pays attention. Turns out, he's going to take another pin, Not as much damage that time, but we still have one gun left, and if you notice, he starts turning back in, and I lead the shot and a little bit too much. He actually slows down. We have it relatively well. A couple of those shells look good, and we hit him with the overpin into the superstructure for almost no damage, about 1100 damage, something like that. But the Monarch on the other side of the map is shooting HE at this guy, which pains me so badly. Now, I get it. It's gonna pen. You're not overpenning the HE. I get that, but in me shooting HE out of a Monarch is almost a never happening circumstance. But as you can see, it was effective, and down goes the Ochakov. Anyway, I hope this has been an eye-opening experience as to why I don't play the Minnesota as much as I do the Kansas, but 162,000 damage, I mean, it's not a bad ship at all. I just don't personally think it's worth the price of admission, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's so expensive to get tier 8s, and it's a negligible upgrade over the Kansas, if you consider it an upgrade at all. So I'm interested in hearing what you guys think down in the comments below. Let me know what your thoughts are. Do you like the Minnesota more? Do you like the Kansas more? I know there's a lot of folks out there that are in the Minnesota camp, so I'm looking forward to hearing from you. And if you like what I'm doing, punch the like button, leave a comment below, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and as always, I will see you in the next video.